Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on the Senior Manager Certification Regime. It's going to be hosted by a couple of firms. Myself, my name is Chris Davies. I'm founder and managing director of Model Office. We're a reg tech business. And then we have Helen Clark, who's managing director of Mint Blue Consulting, who will talk a little bit later on after I've finished around 10:30 to take you through the project management part of implementation of this all-encompassing regime. The today's webinar, just a few house points, will be recorded, and we will give you full access to the recording, so you can review it at your leisure. And really today is all about implementation. By now, ideally, you should have a handle on this regime, the three constituent parts of it, and it's all now about not just the what it is, but the how to implement. Going forward, we only have a few months left until the 9th of December. So when we're talking about the SM&CR implementation and the key learning objectives of today's webinar, really we want to ensure that you understand the impact of the regime across your business. It's broken down into three parts: the senior manager's regime itself, so who is a senior manager and what roles and responsibilities do they have, prescribed responsibilities, which we'll talk about, who you need to certify under the certification regime, which is the next tier, and what systems have you got in place to make sure that's done annually. Identifying market risk takers, for example, is a big one. So identifying the right people to certify, very important. And then we have the conduct rules from that point of view, where the consequences of getting all this wrong is quite immense. It's really a move from civil law to the FCA being the judge and jury. You have the burden of proof around accountability in your business, so it's all about evidence-based practice from that point of view. We also want to make sure that you stay on the road as a business and you keep doing the good work that you're doing, so obviously seeing your clients and making sure that they're getting serviced in the right way, making sure the business runs smoothly, is streamlined, it's important. And also ensuring that you're taking a root and branch review across the business. And you're not just, if you outsource to a compliance service, that's great. For one, you can rely on them to do a lot of this work. But really, because the onus is upon you, then in more ways than one, you've got to show that you've got the systems and controls and governance procedures in place, and we'll go through that too. A lot of it touches on cultural processes. A lot of people view this as very, subjective, but there are diagnostics and tools and techniques that we can use to ensure that you're identifying, measuring, improving your cultural compliance. And also, it's as point 4 on this is sustainability of the business going forward. What does success look like? Well, we've already had an example of this with the banks. The banks had to implement the SM&CR in 2016, and also the insurers had to do it in December last year. Now it's our turn. So really, the first and most important thing, again, is breaking it down to those three key areas. The senior managers know what they are responsible for, and what they should do, and how they hand over and delegate their roles and responsibilities and tasks and activities, and all that's documented. You then have to ensure that you have the right people in the right place with the right skills and the right responsibilities and the right capabilities. This regime is about two key areas. It's about competence, knowledge, and making sure that your staff have the right competence and knowledge in the roles that they're allocated, and conduct, which is their behaviour, making sure that they're walking their talks. The conduct rules, as we'll see, are the foundation for behaviour, and we need to understand how this is moving from the current regime, the approved persons regime, going forward too. So we then really homing in on the systems and controls that you have in your business. Again, if you're outsourcing to a third-party compliance service. That's great. They will have all that, but you need to know it, you need to understand it, and you need to understand how it applies to you as a business, because the FCA will hold individual firms to account going forward from 9th of December this year. Really, as we've seen with the banks, the SMCR are not playing games here, and nor should you. They're viewing this as their top trump card, if you like, regarding enforcing regulation, and they are also encouraging firms to self-regulate in this area. So, we've already had an example of one of the top 4 banks. The chief executive was fined £600,000 for trying to silence a whistleblower. That's across 2 regimes, the FCA and the PRA overall. So really, as I've talked about, this is enforceable, and thus, you need to prove that you're complying on an ongoing basis with the regime. Now let's break this regime down for you into three parts. The first part is the senior managers regime, which is all about pre-approval by the FCA. You have certain forms you need to complete and send in to the FCA for certain senior managers. Helen will go through them, but there are some dates coming up that you need to be aware of. Certainly the 9th of September, the forms become available. I think it's the 9th of November. They need to be completed and submitted. And then there's a cut-off date, the 2nd of December. But as I say, Helen will go through that in more detail a bit later on. Looking at making sure you're mapping the roles and responsibilities, we'll go through that and how you can do that for the senior managers in the business. And then, looking at fitness and propriety, criminal checks and regulatory referencing. You have to go back 6 years on new hires, which is a change. But the key area as well is that you need to factor in behaviour. Has their past behaviour, is that suitable for your business going forward? Because that's where the cultural fit happens. Certification regime, you already jumped through the hoop of the APA regime, approved persons regime, and that's it. Someone's approved, and that's pretty much all you have to do. Now it's moving through onto an annual basis, so you really need to factor in how you're tracking these people on an annual basis who are certified. You need to ensure that you know who is going to be certified and who can cause what the FCA classes significant harm to the firm, the clients, and the market. Material risk takers. So that's normally people who hold the qualifications to do the job, and people who obviously are involved in client engagement and what's classified now as advice. Then we really have the fitness and propriety come back into that, and also what's big on this, which blends into the conduct rules, is training and competence, making sure that your training and competence programs are fit for purpose and everybody knows the right stuff within their roles. And finally, but not least, is the conduct rules, which is really the 2 tiers of these rules now. The individual tier rules are very similar to the approved persons regime. What's new is really the rules that apply to the senior managers. And here, again, it's all about training and competence. Everybody knows the conduct rules, how it applies to their jobs. And most importantly, if there's a breach, then senior managers know what they need to do, because what they have to do is take what's called reasonable steps to ensure those breaches are managed effectively and efficiently going forward. There has been some new information which has come out from the FCA very recently, and I think this is actually some good stuff. We'll talk about firm classification in a minute, because they will all have written to the FCA will have written to you or are writing to you about what type of firm that you're going to be classified as. But I would suspect that the majority of you are limited scope, sole traders, or core firms, not enhanced firms. But what's really interesting here is that the FCA have realised that there's a few loopholes in the rules and regulations as it sits with our side of the industry. So they've really brought out clarification of requirements on the scope of this certification regime, which is all effectively about the client dealing function. In the rule book, that's this 27.9.19, and that really is providing firms with flexibility on the judgment to certify a role. So why is that important? Well, if you employ planners, or you are a planner, for example, are you giving advice to a client at any particular stage in the journey that you're on when you're writing suitability reports and the rest of it? Some planners may be classed in that they are giving advice, some may not. But it's very important you need to know that, because MiFID II has what's called information givers, where they're classing people who are touching a client and giving information, which could be classed then as advice. We all know clients have selective memories, so we need to be very careful in this. So the role factors that this new clarification brings is that if you're offering a simple or automated advice proposition, then pretty much you're not going to be coming within the certification regime. But if any time you're touching a client using discretion or judgment, then there's a question mark, and you need to be very careful around that and look at, are you going to certify that person or not? Other stuff that's come through is a big one for limited scope firms is effectively that the senior manager's conduct rule, which is one of the new ones, which is classed as SC4, which is you must disclose appropriately any information of which the FCA or PRA would reasonably expect notice. So in other words, it's your communication strategy with the regulators. That now applies to executive directors, non-approved executive directors for limited scope firms. So non-exec directors as well comes under that scope, and we'll talk a little bit of that a bit later on from that point of view. But that's an important point for limited scope firms. Head of legal function doesn't really apply, and that's enhanced firms. And the directory that's coming out very shortly, really the directory of persons, which kind of replaces the register over time, is an interesting one, because there's going to be a lag for us in our side of the industry, because from our side we're expected to submit that information by the end of next year. So there is a question mark around who's going to appear on this over the next year or so, which isn't a great position to be in. We're waiting for more clarification on that going forward. I mentioned tiered firm categorization. Ideally, you should know. Practical planning points below gives a good idea of what you need to be doing if you don't. The FCA are writing to all firms affected by the regime before the 9th of December this year. So hopefully you would receive that. If you haven't, question it with your support services, your compliance support services, and they should know. And also you can go onto the FCA website. There's a tool, online tool there, where you can take a diagnostic assessment and find out what type of firm that you are. There's 3 tiers: limited scope firm, you've got the core firms, and then you've got the enhanced firms, which is pretty self-explanatory from this slide. Moving on to the elements of the SMCR, there's quite a lot, as you can see on that table, from responsibility mapping all the way through to auxiliary staff. You can see from the ticks, what applies to you and your classification as a business. It all applies to enhanced firms, and then with core and limited scope firms, less so, but there's still quite a lot of the 17 elements that apply. We'll go through some of them to see how you can actually implement them going forward. What we would say is that responsibility mapping is actually good practice, even though you don't have to do it if you're a core or limited scope firm. It's good, good practice to set out an organogram, if you like, within the business to find out who does what their roles and responsibilities are, what the reporting lines are, so forth. It's just good practice. And if you look at actually the rule book, SIS 2.1, kind of requires you to do that anyway, because that really requires that you know what the responsibilities are within the business, who's responsible for what, and that the business affairs are monitored. So again, that's something that you might want to bring in as you implement the regime itself. But as I say, the vast majority of these elements we will cover during the next 15 minutes of my side. So let's break the regime down. First and foremost, we have got the senior managers regime itself, and then what this is all really about is FCA approval and getting the application forms in, allocating the roles and responsibilities. Each senior manager should have a prescribed responsibility within the business. We'll go through that regarding that on the next couple of slides. And the fact is here is that you need to ensure that all the fit and proper requirements are very firmly in place, which is criminal checks, qualifications, the competence records, training records, personal characteristics that I talked about. Conduct is a big issue now. So we need to ensure that they are the right type of person for the role. And obviously, you've got the 6 years worth of regulatory referencing for new hires, and there is an approval process to go down. So that will take time, and we would recommend, if you haven't done that already, then you get on it, because we're already into September now, and we've only got a couple of months left for this to be done, and there are forms that have deadlines for you to get in. Also, we have as I talked about, prescribed responsibilities and statements of responsibility. The prescribed responsibilities themselves are really set in stone by the FCA. We have a slide on that, which I'll go through in a minute for you. But obviously, if you can't allocate, if someone in the business, has a dual role, for example, then you just need to basically evidence why they've got a couple of prescribed responsibilities and what the lines of delineation are, how you're separating them, and how they're operated from that point of view. So it's all, I guess, to say about evidence-based practice. Statements of responsibility are very important for you to get right. Statements of responsibility really is making it clear what the senior manager is responsible and accountable for, and it accurately reflects, the affairs, the activities that they're involved in. We talk about ARCs, model office, which is, really looking at breaking it down into 4 key areas. The most important thing here is that it's not a job description, should I say. It's very precise and clear. That's just why we break it down to these ARCs areas, which stands for actionable, by the FCA. So identifying clear accountability and responsibility. They're reflective of the role and the responsibility and the work the individual does. They're clear and concise, and they clearly describe the accountability and responsibilities, and they're succinct on containing relevant information about the responsibilities. It's not a job description. The forms I've mentioned, and Helen will go into those in more detail. And then we've got the handover procedures and documents. So if they're handovering responsibilities, that all has to be documented. If you're holding meetings where the senior manager is the chair of the meeting, could be committee meetings, board meetings, or whatever, that is all has to be minuted and documented. And then the training and competence evidence and the conduct rules application and the breach process I'll go through in a little while for you on that. Then really we've got an example here of how, what the roles are that may apply to, let's say, a core firm. And what we've got here is that you've got the executive, the chief executive, or the chief finance officer, oversight, which is the chair or committee chairs, independent directors involved in the business. It could be your chief executive directors, CEOs. And then you've got the lines of defense, which is compliance, audit, risk, and anti-money laundering from that point of view. And the practical planning points you can see at the bottom of implementing this is that, you can hold more than one senior management function, but it requires FCA authorization, and all senior management function roles are covered by the certification regime. So we'll begin to see how it all blends together. The interesting thing here, is that you can then look to map it out. So you've got the senior management functions, as you can see on the left-hand side of the function name. We've blended that into 2 key areas, split it into 2 key areas: governing functions, which is chief exec, executive director, partner, or chair, and the description of what they do. And then you've got the required functions, which will be, the SMF16, the old CF10s, will have the compliance oversight within the business. And then you've got the money laundering SMF17s within the business. So again, it's really ensuring that you know who does what and how those functions apply to that particular role going forward. Talked about prescribed responsibilities, and they only apply to core and enhanced firms. Bonkers, in my opinion, because limited scope firms would really need to know this anyway. But if you are a limited scope firm, it's just good practice, really, to understand what this means and how it works and how it may apply, even if you don't have to actually map it out. But the key area here is, there are only a small number for core firms, 7 in total, and of those 7, you're probably only going to have probably the top 4, I'll be honest. So again, you may want to look at this, look at it with your compliance people, and make sure that you understand it and how it applies to your business, and then most importantly, who it's allocated to. As you can see from the bottom, practical planning points there. Who it's allocated to is important. Ideally, they shouldn't be shared, but if they have to share them or divide them, then you've got the evidence of why that is and why you've done it and how it's managed going forward. I've got some examples here of statements of responsibility as a guide format. We have a full guide, so Helen will talk to you about our implementation pack that we've designed for the SMCR, and it's all basically designed about the implementation, how you apply it to your business. It's all practicalities, and part of that we have statements of responsibility guide, and this gives you an example of how you can map out the statements of responsibility within the business across the senior management functions that apply to you as a firm. And then you've got the prescribed responsibilities here, as you can see, for core firms, for example, on the right hand side of that middle table. If it's shared, who is it shared with and why is it being shared, for example, and then other responsibilities at the bottom, depending on what the title of the responsibility is, the business function, if you like, and then further details about how that applies and if it's shared or not. But we have a full guide covering all sorts of case studies in our implementation pack, as well as more webinars in there, and 8 overall reports and guides across the regime, as well as a project plan, which Helen will talk to you about. Role mapping, as I mentioned, is good practice if you don't have to do it, which I guess the majority of the people on this call won't. But ideally, regarding 6.21, it's good practice. You need to be looking at this anyway within the business. And this just gives you an idea of the senior management functions, prescribed responsibilities, and overall responsibilities, how that can apply across your business. And ideally, you should be doing this annually as a business going forward from that point of view. So I think that's just all about good practice from that side of things. And non-exec directors, as we talked about, really you need to be looking at, if you do employ non-exec directors, you need to really assess at granular level what they do, what the influence is on the business, to see if they need to come under the SMF, and they need to be certified. But the issue here is that, as I've talked about, you've got SC4, which we'll talk about on the conduct rules, which now applies to limited scope firms. So again, that's important to factor in. Let's move on to the certification regime for you. So the certification regime, it really is all about, as I've talked about, material risk takers. As you can see from the table on the right-hand side, we've mapped out the functions so that you need to know those functions and how they apply to the business. We've mapped it across against the current regime, the approved persons regime or equivalent. So you can see the current roles, which you may be familiar with. CF30s is a classic example in client dealing. And then we've got a description of how that kind of like how that works, and how you may want to look at it and map it across your individuals in business. The most important thing here is, as I said, is annual certification, and the considerations is consistency, who should be supervised, if you ever have a member of staff suspended, what the procedure is there, and more. So again, just get your head around that table, understand how it applies, map it out, liaise with your compliance support services to make sure that that's all watertight as you go through, and you've got a process to go through that. What we do at a model office is that our RegTech system, what we call builds a life cycle, if you like. So across the journey that your staff are on in the world of certification, which is all about assessment, annual certification, any concerns, conduct with concerns, training and competency, breach reporting, and so forth. They leave. And the key area here, practical planning points for you, is watch out, as I said, for information givers. Anyone who's touching a client could potentially be classed as giving advice. They will need to be certified. Identify those who can cause significant harm, which is really certification functions. And redesign your training and competence plan and annually review it to make sure everybody's getting the right level of knowledge and competence going forward. Conduct rules, really on the last 5 minutes, just covering these areas, is we've got them replacing, as I've talked about, APA, principles and guidance. It's a very high level approach. There are 2 tiers to it. The first tier you can see here, which I'm sure we'll all be familiar with, on the 5 individual conduct rules, integrity, duty, care, and diligence, moving through to standards of market conduct. And it's all about, identifying them, how they apply, training people up on them so they know how they apply to their business, and making sure you're dealing with any potential breaches through taking reasonable steps. Because the first three areas of the SC, the senior management conduct rules, are all about taking reasonable steps in case of a breach or to stop a breach, so to speak. So from that point of view, you need to make sure if you're in the senior management function that all this is trained in, you know it, and you can understand how you apply it to your role as you move forward within the business. And we've also life cycled this for you so you can see how the journey of someone who a staff member with your business, how that works through their journey, through their career with you. And it's all about the foundation, setting the foundation levels for conduct, their behavior, how the rules apply to their jobs, ensuring the reasonable steps are understood by senior managers, applying a breach log. So in our implementation pack, we have a full guide on a breach log and an example of how to structure a breach log with example breaches in there and what to do. So that's all in there. It's a bit like a risk register, for example, that can be applied to a business to manage risks. And then follow-up actions and MI reports and reviews are equally important as well, making sure that you're documenting and minuting all the meetings going forward and training competence assessments. Fit and proper is really in the spotlight, so we've included a slide on this, particularly within the conduct rules, and really that's on recruitment. So as you're recruiting people through, you need a process to make sure that you're managing and monitoring it, what the ongoing requirements are, and the processes and the regulatory references and the criminal checks, and financial soundness of the individual, the qualification. And then, as I say, the two key areas that the FCA are really concerned about is the competence of your staff, the knowledge that they've got, and the conduct and their behaviour, which comes into the fit and proper arena. Training and competence is the big one with this as well, an overall assessment conclusion. And again, that all needs to be evidenced and held on file. And again, Helen will go through that when she talks about project planning and mapping. Reasonable steps. What are the FCA really looking for? Well, the FCA will take action against senior managers if there are breaches in the conduct rules, and they will hold the SMF, the senior management function, responsible if they did not take reasonable steps. The key considerations for you is understanding who does what and who did what in case of a breach, for example, nature of complexity of the business, management information, decision-making, legal and regulatory obligations need to be understood within that. And then you've got the delegation of duties and reporting lines. So has any role been delegated? And if it has been delegated, has it been delegated in the right way? So in other words, for example, if someone's been delegated a task to go and see a client and talk about something, do they have the right qualifications and expertise? And if they don't, then that could potentially be a breach. So that's the type of thing that we're talking about here, and that has to be evidenced and put in place. You've got to obviously avoid what we call groupthink and make sure everybody's individually accountable, and you've got good challenge within the business and good 4-eye sense check across the business. It's all good risk management stuff, really, that you need to apply in. And then the FCA, what they will consider is the statements of responsibility that you've carefully mapped and included the prescribed responsibilities that we talked about before. Remember the ARCs, and it's not a job description. And then you've got the roles and responsibility mapping, which we're saying is good practice, even though you don't have to do it. Operations and how responsibilities are taken care of, and then looking at the roles and responsibilities, the reference records, and looking at the relationship between all the SMFs within the business. So finally, but not least, from me, what we need to look at, what you need to be mapping out really at the moment when implementing is looking at any problem areas that you can cite across the 3 tiers of the regime and mapping out the solutions. We'd strongly recommend, look, if you outsource to a support service, that you take ownership yourself of that, because you need, as part of the SM&CR, take ownership of outsourcing, and it's who's the gatekeeper for that relationship, and then making sure that any information they're giving you is understood and applied and implemented to your business, and you've got systems and controls around that. As we are involved in technology can help you with that, because what technology is effectively an enabler tool to allow you to do things more efficiently and effectively, and hopefully save some time and costs along the way. And what Model Office can do with that is certainly map out where you currently are against the SM&CR and what you need to do next going forward. And it also gives full access to the implementation pack that we've talked about. So I'm finishing on time, which is always good news. And now I'm going to hand over to Helen, if I can find her on the system. And that's my alarm going off to say I'm finished on time. There you go. Let me just cancel that. And then I'll hand over to Helen. So 2 seconds. Hi, Helen, you should be on. Hello, Helen. Hi, Helen. I don't think Helen's with us. Try again. Helen seems to have dropped off. I don't know what's gone on there, so let me apologise for that. She was on before, so I don't know what's gone on. So what I'll do is I'll briefly take you through Helen's position unless she can get back in onto the system. So that's technology for you. But really, Helen's role is very much her expertise, if you like, is very much in the world of project planning and project mapping. And Helen's consultancy, Mint Blue, has been formed around that expertise. Obviously, the first and most important thing here is, why do you need a project? And from that point of view, obviously there are kind of 3 key areas that you might want to look at regarding this. I think the key area with this is that it's all about accountability, all about understanding the responsibilities and how you delegate. And there's some examples here of quotes that we've come across in the marketplace of chief actuary or non-exec director from that side of things, who basically have key responsibilities, and they need to ensure that they're managing their accountabilities. So we talked about over here under the FCA, the Barclays CEO was fined £321,000. Under the PRA, it was pretty much the same. So it was over £600,000 in total. So there are real risks involved with this across liability and fines, reputation, and preparation and implementation. Who's involved? Well, really, you need to look at your resources as a business. We've got HR, you've got senior manager, you've got compliance, you've got training. To say, if you're outsourcing to compliance, for example, there's still an ownership on you as a business because it's all about you from that side of things. And so from that side, you need to ensure that you know who's involved within your project and making sure that everybody's on board and on the same page going forward, which is obviously a very imperative with any project planning strategy going forward. Getting the team right is the most important thing. We then need to take a look at from the side of, I'm trying to bring Helen back in. I think she's come in. Helen, can you hear me? No. Okay, I'll carry on. So what we've now got is checking and confirming your firm type, as we talked about, is very important. The FCA will have been writing to you. If you haven't received that, they will be writing to you very shortly. I was talking to the FCA yesterday. We're running the professional, the PFS are basically invited us in to talk about RegTech to their 26 regional meetings, and the FCA are there, and they were saying that they've pretty much written to 2/3 of firms, so you should receive that if you haven't already, but do check their website and check their diagnostic if you can. What we've then got is mapping between the regimes, so checking and allocating the responsibilities, fit and proprietary checks we talked about, and training and competence from those side of things. Regarding the project approach that you need to take with your business, what we've got is a 3-tier of firms needing to know what they are. And as Helen, Helen?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Ah, brilliant. I'm so
sorry. You're very faint.
Let me turn this up. Can you hear me now?
You're very faint my end, but crack on.
Is that better now?
Slightly, but crack on.
Okay. So apologies everyone, and thanks Chris for picking that up. Hopefully that can be heard okay.
We can hear you now.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm just picking up from the slides that Chris is on at the moment. So just bear with me. There we go. So Chris, apologies, I was busy dialing in, so I might have said something you said on this. Going to dial that down. Into theory. There we go. Right, so in terms of firm times classification, there are 3 firm types: limited, core, and enhanced, as you know. So you should know, as Chris said, what your firm's classification is. And it's the FCA did say that they were going to actually contact everyone to confirm, but it's worth checking your firm against the criteria, as Chris has mentioned. Chris, if you can kindly move the slides on. So Chris also mentioned about mapping roles and how important this is. So as mentioned, we put a pack together, and I put a mapping spreadsheet of core and enhanced firms. And a snapshot of this is shown on the slide. This shows the direct maps and also the alternatives. So some current roles can map to more than one role under the new regime. So if you have a look at the example on the slide, you can see on the left-hand side, it's got CFF Director, CF30 Customer Function, so they can both map across to the Exec Director. On the right-hand side, obviously, as you come up to being an enhanced firm, it becomes more complicated. So you've got more than one option coming through. So limited will have some multiple options, enhanced will have even further. So the mapping spreadsheet has proved very useful for a lot of firms in actually shortcutting and keeping a record of what they have going forward. We move on to the next slide. So once you have your mapping completed, the prescribed responsibilities need to be allocated according to the relevant role. Number of PRs will depend on your firm type, and they're designed to be held by one individual per responsibility. It can be split. If the role is shared, you might have part-time workers, and in practice this may need to be the case if you're part of a smaller firm. Likewise, significant management certification functions may also apply if you're a larger firm. So it's the next stage after you've done the mapping in terms of the project approach. We move on to the next slide. As Chris also mentioned earlier, there's all the checks to carry out, the fit and proprietary check. So enhancements to the criminal record checks will be needed. So your firm should really ideally be registered with the DBS if you're not already. Regulatory references required from 9th of December. And this is really to weed out individuals with poor conduct records that are moving from firm to firm, make it more transparent going forward. That's again the next step in the project approach. We move on to the next slide. If there are any enhanced firms on the call, there will be some additional requirements. You're required to submit the Form K. We'll mention a bit more about the forms in a minute. So it's making sure that they've got the right information on them. Enhanced firms need to have the, So it's making sure that there's the responsibility to map included and everything is included across. If you're not an enhanced firm, it's a good job to remember that statements of responsibility can be requested at any time by the FCA for both limited and core firms. the next slide. So as Chris mentioned, there are multiple forms that can be submitted depending on what your firm changes are. And they're listed in the FCA Solo Regulated Firms Guide. So it's worth having a look, and they've got some useful scenarios in there as well. From the 9th of September, which is looming very fast, there's a new Form A, which is coming into effect for those taking up roles after the 9th of December. And by the 9th of November, you need to have submitted any relevant forms using Connect to the FCA, with 2nd of December cut off for all Form K submissions. So going back and looking from a project perspective, it's really important to get this in the right order and understand who you've got in the relevant roles in order to fill out all the relevant forms. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you. Finally, training is key. This will be ongoing already, but it also includes staff, except ancillary staff who do not have any contact with clients and their data. This means some firms will need to make internal decisions regarding, for instance, paraplanners. So in some firms, paraplanners have a lot of client contact and therefore need to be trained. In other firms, there's no communication direct to clients, so training may not be required. So it's just understanding where your firm fits into that. Given some of the training is running through to December 2020, this is a part of the work stream or project that you're looking at running for the next 18 months, approximately, just under now. We're now in September, 15 months. So this concludes a very brief overview of how you can structure your project based on your requirements. Much of this is a checklist, but it's ensuring you have everything included in time, and it needs some coordination and management to make sure there's nothing missed. It's really important. So you can just skip through to a couple of slides, the next slide through. So as mentioned, we've actually put a pack together between our two firms. So Chris has put in a lot of really useful practical guides and reports. I've put together a project plan in Excel, which has got all the high-level tasks through. You can see a little bit of the snapshot there, looking at firm type, allocation of responsibilities, senior managers, submitting forms, all the things we've been talking about briefly today. And then there's a couple of examples about the mapping spreadsheet. And as mentioned, firms who have taken this pack found this really useful to understand where it's all been mapped across, and it also covers off the certification staff as well. So apologies for the interrupted part of the demonstration for myself, and I'll pass across to Chris to finish off.
Thanks, Helen. So hopefully you found this useful. I think the important thing to mention on the pack itself is that it's ever evolving. As we see new stuff coming through, like the new guidance that's come through from the FCA, it's updated. So if you buy into the pack, you'll also see it update. Anybody who buys into Model Office, and you can see our system here, an idea of how the benchmarks and the dashboards and the heat map dashboards sit, then you will get access to the pack within the outputs that Model Office provides you from that side of things as well. So if you want more information about the pack or anything that we've talked about today, you can see in red the email at the bottom right. Please email through. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear about your journeys and how you're doing, any key issues or challenges or big wins that you're finding with the SMCR. And we also will be running a number of webinars going through the year now. So look out for those similar to this. And we'll also be running a suite of SM&CR workshops, which are CPD accredited. We'll let you know. We'll put you on the list if you're okay with that. Let us know if you want to go on the list, obviously for GDPR purposes. And then we'll let you know when those workshops are coming up, where we will again refine them based on the latest thinking from the regulator and also the latest experience that we are getting back from our clients and firms in the marketplace of how they are implementing this all-encompassing regime. So thanks so much for taking your time out of your very busy days. We're going to finish a minute before our cut-off date, which is great. you'll see this webinar listed on our RegTech channel, which we'll send through to you because it's all recorded, and it will also be put on social media. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time.